and welcome back to It's a Spectrum. Today I have a pretty cool guest. I gotta say, I'm actually kind of a long-term fan of this creator. He's known as Generic Art Dad on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube. Also known as Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hey Ryan, how you doing?
Doing good. So to get started, normally for the people that aren't affiliated with your content, you yourself are autistic, right?
Yep.
And a lot of your content is surrounded around how would you describe your content?
Man, well, I also have ADHD, so it's all over the place. It's
Right.
whatever I'm thinking about in the moment. I mean, a lot of it has to do with being neurodivergent, being ADHD, autism, mental health, but then also I get into like social issues and other psychology, ethics, things like that.
Right. I like your content because I noticed that you do a specific thing where rather than have a sort of like dictative um info explaining kind of video where you talk about these topics directly to the audience, you do skits so that the conversation happens in front of the viewer rather than to the viewer. And I think that that's really interesting. Personally, I think that that is one of the better ways that I absorb information because sometimes when it's being fed to me, like my PDA takes over and I don't want to listen.
Yep.
So I think that's really cool about your content specifically.
Thank you. Yeah.
So usually we start off by asking if you're comfortable uh, telling us a little bit about your journey with your diagnosis.
Yeah. Oh boy, where do I start? I was 30 when I got my ADHD diagnosis. Looking back, there are a lot of markers that I could see now that are obvious that I was neurodivergent. But my wife and I, we were living in Chicago at the time, doing like the corporate world and like trying to buy a house and having kids. And it was just a lot. It was too much. And I was up and down. We thought that I was actually bipolar because I would have these swings for days at a time where I was manic and then depressive. And so I had been seeing a therapist because we were having our first child, and that was really stressful. And then we had our first child, and I don't know, do you have kids?
I don't personally know.
It is so fucking hard. Can I curse on here? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, oh fine. If it's too much, like we'll bleep it, but
Yeah,
sure.
it's a lot. Anyways, it pushed me to a point, and my wife's like, "You got to get something figured out." So I went to go see a psychologist, and she was like, you're not bipolar. Like this is ADHD. Like those
Right.
highs and lows are because of the ADHD, and your attention swings." So that's when I got diagnosed with ADHD, and over the next few years, kept working on things, trying to figure out how to build like a better life that fit my brain. But we were having issues with like our marriage, and a lot of that was stemming from like struggles that I was having. And I kept making these changes. They were very easy to me, but I kept bumping up against these things that just felt way too deep inside of me, where it's like, I can't, these are things that I can't change. And that was so odd to me because as someone that at the time I didn't realize masked so heavily, it was really easy for me to change things about myself. But so when I start realizing like these are things I can't do, we just happened to land on a TikTok video, and that's been almost 3 years ago now. And actually, that video was about 3 years ago, and it was someone talking about I think like the RADS some of the autism self-diagnosis tests, and my wife and I both did them, and I was scoring off the charts. And so
Yeah.
we decided to go through the process because at the time I didn't really know much about autism. The image I had in my head was more of like lower masking, higher supports needs, and I felt a lot of guilt with saying that I was autistic without getting a professional diagnosis. So I went through the whole process, and now it's been like 3 years ago since I finally got that diagnosis. But I mean, it's been a long process of just trying to figure it out. And when I got it, they told me that like 10 years ago you would have slipped through the cracks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I even remember I was diagnosed around middle school age, like 13 or 14, actually 14 or 15. And even then I was being told like it was considered late diagnosis. And like even though I had an official diagnosis by my primary physician and therapist, I still had to take it to specialists to like verify with my school because they didn't want to see it because I also was like high masking. I think the thing that was kind of unfortunate from a personal perspective, but like it helped me with my overall case, which is why I got it earlier than a lot of other people that I've been seeing, is that there was such a specific comparison to my high school years versus my elementary school years. I think that I was a lot more presenting in my elementary school years, but they didn't have the resources to like just outright say that I was autistic.
Yeah.
Um, so can I ask, so what got you interested in making the content that you've been making now? Like, how did that start?
Oh boy. For what? Let me know if my answers are too long. I feel like I
No, no,
don't
that's
know how
fine.
to talk short. Um, so I right around the same time that I started getting the autism diagnosis. Um, so that was about a year after COVID started, and we had been in Chicago, and we wanted to get out of the Midwest, so we ended up moving to Denver, and we both had the same jobs. But my wife had been telling me for years, she's like, you need to quit your job. Like it's too much for you. You're not handling it well. And so there were some family circumstances, some health issues, and we decided this is a good time for you to quit, so you can take care of the family health issues. And I did that for a couple of months, and the person that had moved in with us, they ended up moving back out, and then we were like, okay, this like let's use this as an opportunity to try and figure something out. And I started trying to make art. I was sculpting, and I was having a little bit of success, but not a whole lot. And my wife's like, you need to make content. Like all the artists are making content now. I was like, fuck
Mm.
that. Like I don't want to do that. I hate that. Um, but I started making it, and it didn't really take off until I started talking about the process, the autism diagnosis that I was going through at the time. I think my first video that like really popped off was I was like, "Do you want to know what it's like to have ADHD?" And I just happened to, I think, word it in a way that was relatable to people. I talked about self control as like trying to not eat like ho hos versus like trying to do wall squats all day, and but like it took off, and I realized that like there was something there about describing like the experience of being neurodivergent that people really related to. And then, like you mentioned, I started realizing that instead of talking directly to the camera, people were way more receptive if you do like skits. And I think it's a large part of it is exactly what you said is the PDA. I do this in my personal life. Like, I think that's one of the reasons that we're so like anecdotal is instead of like giving people advice, because I think that pisses us off. Like, we don't want people to tell us what to
Yeah.
do. And so it's like you're more receptive if you just have two people playing it out, and try to be as like honest and not have like a straw man. Um, and it like lets people kind of pick and choose what information they want to take away from it. And since I'm not a professional, a lot of my content I've tried to do just like here's my experience, here like words to put to your experience of like what it is like. And it just kind of took off from there. And I feel like every day there hasn't been a day, I've been doing it for like 3 years now. There hasn't been a day where I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like I don't know what to do next.
Right.
So uh, yeah, it's and so it's just kind of all over the place now. But yeah, that's how I fell into it.
No, yeah, I definitely get that. I remember so because I do stand up comedy, and I remember when it was still Musically and it was transitioning into TikTok. Nobody wanted to get on it, and then I started seeing like certain communities grow in it, and it was like a switch in my brain. I got my TikTok like 2019, so like several months before COVID happened, and I was telling everybody like this is gonna be the next Vine. Like nobody wants it, but it's gonna be like a new form of business card where like you can access any community through these short-term videos. And then it did. The same thing happened for me. Like a lot of my content started with posting my specific autistic jokes on TikTok and that growing into like the following that I have now.
That's awesome.
Um, can I ask, so, because I'm sure like a lot of people are curious, you do like, therapist characters and can I ask where you get the information that you provide in when you're like descriptive about the thing you talk about?
Yeah, that's the thing that I like personally struggle with a lot because uh I'm oh, man. I'm very big on like science and medicine and not trying to misrepresent things or put bad information out there, but also cognizant of the fact that a lot of the descriptions of autism and being neurodivergent do not line up with my reality, my lived experience. And I think that that's a very fine line because some people fall into this trap where they over prescribe their experience because they think like, if this is my experience, this is what it's like for everybody. And so I try to be very aware that like my experience being different than what a lot of the professionals say doesn't mean that everyone's experience is like mine, but also there is clearly a problem if the professionals are not including my experience
Right.
in like the autistic criteria. And so that's why a lot of my content has been about just kind of explaining my experience. Like it'll be between like two partners or like two friends or like someone at the office. But also when I do therapist characters, um, I try to do a lot of like research to make sure if I am saying anything that could be taken as like an absolute,
Right.
um, that I'm being very careful with that. So I'll spend a lot of time researching, like reading articles. I will float ideas past ChatGPT. I try not to rely too much on it, but it's very helpful to like, I'll run a script by it and I'll say like, have I missed anything? Am I potentially like being offensive in some way that I don't realize? And it's like helpful to try and point out some like potential pitfalls and things like that. So um, it's a lot of like reading articles and just like reviewing stuff if it's ever like not about experience.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I know that when I make videos about my own understanding of like my experience with autism, I'm constantly saying like in my opinion and like from my perspective, so people understand. Like, I know that I'm not an expert,
Yeah.
but I am like I don't have professional experience. I have personal experience, and that's honestly like what kind of drives this show is making space for people to provide that personal comparison so that one like they understand the experience of the individuals as people, but also like they get practical examples of what's being explained in like the books and articles that they're reading so that they know what you know they know what it means when we say masking, they know what it means when we say executive dysfunction, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's been so helpful about you're talking about different communities on TikTok. I think that that has been one of the biggest advantages of having an autistic community on TikTok is that it's given a voice to the autistic experience. And there are problems with that, with like who has a voice and whatnot. But
Yeah.
it's been missing a lot in like research, and also for people that like just read about it in books. I think that's been really important. Like there definitely is a need to be talking about experiences too, in addition to like the studies and the medical criteria and whatnot.
Yeah, that reminds me of like one specific video that I like of yours. I think it was a recent one where you actually have a conversation about like not the definition of masking, but like what we mean by masking. Like the difference between I think I left this in a comment too. How I describe it is like it's the difference between masking and like social camouflaging, where like everyone has some degree of like altering the persona to be sociable, but autistic masking is something specific, or neurodivergent masking is something specific. Um, I a while ago I made a TikTok where I take the when I tried to describe it, I told people when you talk about neurodivergent masking, it's kind of literal. Like if you think of it from a literal perspective of like a mask serves two functions. There's the outward layer and the inward layer. The outward layer is providing a version of persona that you think is acceptable instead of the one that you actually like that is you. And then the inside is um, hiding the flip side is hiding those other traits that are deemed from other people's perspectives not acceptable. Um, And so I think I was reminded of that when I saw your recent video about masking.
I think, yeah, and I think a big part of it too, like you're right, like the difference between like social camouflaging and masking. I don't know if this is the video you're talking about, but I think for me, one of the things that sticks out is like it comes from like a place of like fear.
Right.
like a necessity. Like if you don't do it, like it's dangerous to not do it. Like it's dangerous to be different. Um, and it's becoming even more dangerous. So like, yeah, I think like that's like there's a big difference there. Because yeah, everyone does adapt, but there's like a fear component.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm having a brain fart. Um, oh, I remember. The other thing I like that's about your content is you also include content about you being a parent and like communicating not only with other people who interact with like that want to give their advice on how you should be a parent, but also how you interact with how people like can learn to interact with children, not only uh neurodivergent or not just children in general, but specifically autistic. Like I'm remembering a video, I can't remember what you called it, but you had laid out like a spider web of I forget what it's called. I know that telemarketers use something similar where it was like a
Flowchart.
flowchart
Yeah.
to address what is and is not adjustable or necessarily what is or is not behavior that requires adjustment when dealing with children. Um, for the audience, can you go into a little bit of that so they know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, you have to bring up a video that I took down.
Oh,
I got a lot of blowback for that one. Um, no, so I'll explain it and then I'll explain why I took it down. Because I still stand by it, but I think that I'll just explain it. So the flowchart was so I'm sure that you're aware, a lot of people in the autistic community are aware of this, that there's a lot of controversy around ABA therapy,
right.
rightfully so. Uh, and I think that a lot of that stems from, I mean, there's a lot of like abuses that happen, but also like the practice itself revolves around forcing autistic people to adapt to an holistic world. And that's like the whole problem with masking is it's too much. It's we like that's too much for our nervous systems to handle. And we need to be met somewhere in the middle. We need to be making more accommodations for autistic people. And so the flow chart was me trying to help people because as a parent who I don't have official diagnoses for my kids, but like I see a lot of traits in them that I see in myself, and it's hard to know, is that just like developmental because of their age? Is it them being neurodivergent in some way? And I'm constantly, especially being late diagnosed, trying to think about like, why do I do the things that I do? Are those things that I should be passing on to my kids? What's the benefit? Because there are a lot of benefits that come with masking. I wouldn't be where I am today without masking. Like masking is a privilege in a lot of ways, but it's also like a prison. And so, um, the flow chart was supposed to go through, is this something that is harmful to them? Like, is it physically harmful to them? Is it putting them in like immediate danger? Like, um, are they running out in the street, like in front of cars? That is something that like you need to change that behavior because there's a safety factor. And then it starts going through like, okay, if it's not an immediate safety factor, is it like a health risk at some point down the future? Like, is it a hygiene thing that they do need to work on? And then it goes through like, is it going to impact like their quality of life? And then the whole thing is supposed to also like weigh against like what is realistic, what is fair to expect out of them, and try and just give people a guide to like go through and be like, okay, this behavior, yeah, it's maybe odd or quirky, but like it's not harming them. Like that's not something that would be just purely masking. And then like there's gradients. Like, is it like purely masking? Is it like in the middle? Is it a full on safety issue? Um, the blowback that I got about that was from people that were like, you've never gone through ABA therapy. And also, you're speaking for the whole autistic community, and you are one part of the spectrum. And I was like, that's very fair. That's absolutely fair criticism. Um, And so I was like, I'm going to take this down and I'm going to go back to the drawing board and try and refine this. And I never really figured out how quite to approach that. So I haven't gone back and done it yet. I would like to at some point. But it's like it's always really tricky when you're talking about subjects like that. And again, like I don't want to be speaking for the whole community. I don't want to be talking about things that I shouldn't be talking about. But the idea was to try and help people like understand, like, hey, you don't need to be beating all this stuff out of your kids. But
Right.
also there are safety issues that like are important.
Yeah, I mean, I unfortunately, unfortunately was unaware of the direct blowback.
It's fine.
When I initially saw the video, I feel like I understood the initial intended concept of like just finding a way to have that conversation and be able to interact with the child in a way that takes time. And what I was seeing from it was like it was an attempt to take the time to try to understand before reacting to what you're seeing from the child. And in that way, I thought, that was an interesting and refreshing view on it. I also speak from a perspective of like I don't have kids. And I also am like a higher level of uh, lower support needs. Um, but I did go through behavioral therapies. Like I went through speech therapy and interaction therapy when I was in high school, and I would say like doing those kind of there was no negative component to those. And so I also don't have that specific experience with ABA. I am aware of it. I do know kids that like people that I know in real life that did go through it. Um, so on one hand, I do understand where people are coming from an outward perspective. Um, sorry. And so, I mean, I do get what, like, I understand, like, why you felt the need to take it down. I do think, like, there is some way to apply it to, at least some cases of autism. I do see the implication, like, I think that had this been applied to at least my case and a few people that I do know that would have benefited from it, our ability to communicate would have progressed a lot earlier. Like the way I I talk a lot about it now, but it was very hard for me to communicate in public when I was coming up, specifically because of things like this, where I didn't know how the other person was going to react, and I didn't want to risk causing a miscommunication or negative reaction. And so, even into like my early years of adulthood, I did not like speaking in public. It was very difficult for me to speak to public. It was difficult for me to meet strangers outright. It always take me like, depending on the situation, between hours and days to get to like comfortable enough with a person to start talking with them regularly. Because I was communicative, but just with people that I like felt trusted. And it was to the point where like my little brother, whenever we went out to like restaurants or the movies, had to speak for me in those circumstances. Um, so I do think that stuff like this can be beneficial, but I also understand, that there is still a long history to address that is not only not addressed from the past, but also is active today, and in some cases getting worse. Um, and I do think that that's also something that's necessary to keep into context.
I think you like you hit on a few factors there that are also relevant, like um oh man, I'm drawing a blank right now, not PDA, but RSD. Like I was super shy when I was a kid. My mom, I remember when I was like 18, I went to the eye doctor and I got to read my notes. My mom had put in there like, does not talk to you if he doesn't know you, and then once he knows you, he doesn't shut up or something like that. It's like, yeah, like I didn't talk to people, and I don't know why. When I was a kid, I know with like peers, like I would get really worried about um being misunderstood and things. But like and I'm sure you've run into this with having a podcast and doing stand up, like when you're talking to a whole bunch of people where it's up to interpretation to like a whole group of people, um, and then people get upset, that's like a whole different kind of like RSD where it's like fuck, like I don't want to do this wrong. Like I don't want to like say something that's causing harm or like upsetting people. Um, and I don't remember why I brought that up. About the video, taking it down. I think it had been like it's been a while since I made that video. It was like a year ago, and I think at that time, like I was getting very like in my head about making content about autism and like not accidentally causing harm. And so that one I was just like, I think particularly sensitive about. And I had another point that I was going to make, and I don't remember it now. So I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I have to see all the time. Well, I think it does remind me of something that I was forgetting when I was kind of rambling. Of like, I can see where it's not, it's not a thing that can be applied to every single case of autism, but I do think that it's something that can be applied to multiple cases in neurodivergency in general. Like, I can also see how this is beneficial for people with ADHD because, like, even right now, what you were describing, that feeling that like comes from the concern, like I also have generalized anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder, and a lot of it comes from the anxiety and trauma that I've experienced through having ADHD and not being diagnosed early on and having to like experience society with that purview of like constantly being judged and like not ridiculed but like scolded. Um, and I definitely think that in that like with that context, there is some benefit to like I do think I liked the video. I didn't think it was a good idea. I even if it's not a tool specifically for parents and children, I think that it's a tool that can be utilized and read. It doesn't. Sorry, I want to like a clear sentence before I have a lot of run-on sentences. Um, I think that it's a tool that has multiple applications. That's the word I was looking for. Like it doesn't even have to specifically be for like children, adult to child interaction. I see like it's something that I started doing about how I interact with people um, personally, like how I address when I'm doing something that is unusual from the perspective of a non-neurodivergent person. And even before this video, that's something that I've maintained for a while. I talk a lot about old experiences and old projects working with people who got frustrated because of my neurodivergency and how it impacted my ability to communicate with them. And it got to a point where it was like a light bulb, like a switch turned in my head where I was like, I know what I can't control, what I can't help doing because of the neurodivergence. I know what I can, and it is my own behavior. And so it became a thing of like not picking my battles, but knowing when I had to be assertive and say like, hey, I know this thing is frustrating from your perspective, but it's not happening to you. It's happening to me.
Yeah.
And it only gets better when I get better at it. And that's like all that I can give you. It's that I acknowledge that it's happening, but I'm working through it.
As you were talking, I feel like you gave me a way to reframe that video as it reminds me of like unmasking, like you're saying, like thinking about your own like social interactions, and then like you just gave me a way to like reframe it as like here's a flow chart for how I am going through and deciding like what of my own behaviors I might want to work on or what behaviors I want to stop doing because they were part of the mask, which is me changing something that's completely innocuous and like just makes me a little bit quirky and like people can just fucking deal with it. So I feel like you gave me a new way to reframe that. And I feel like so much of like dealing with social media and big audiences is like just being cognizant of like how you frame things to people.
Yeah. And it's something interesting you said about certain aspects of masking can have privilege does remind me of like something I don't remember exactly what we were talking about. It was a previous guest that we had on, but we were talking about the different level systems that was introduced in 2013 to describe like the for lack of a better phrasing, unfortunately, severity in cases of like people with less motor skill and understanding and people with like less support needs like you and I. And um, it reminded me of something that I was trying to get into about what we like still don't know about autism. Um, how the social aspect can impact the development of the person with autism. Because I know that now, if I were to be obsessed, I would be considered level one. But in elementary school, I was a lot more presenting, and I was confident that. Sorry, I'm going to rephrase that because I'm remembering it as an adult, but I have to think about it from my when I was a kid. But when I was in elementary school, I know that I was a lot more presenting, and I most likely would have been considered level two or level three, because I do remember them trying to tell that to my mom. Not that specifically, because the terminology and resource was not there yet.
Sure.
But they were. What happened in my personal experience, which I talk about a lot in my other episodes, is they wanted to put me in special ed, which in elementary school was just like a easier form of the learning and a lot of like private free space time. I wasn't learning; they were just going to kind of tuck me away, and they weren't trying to, but that was what special ed was for me in elementary school. And my mom didn't want that because what it felt like was they were trying to give up on me. And she was like, no, like he's different, but he's not lesser. And she actually like did a lot to fight for me. And so I benefit from that experience of like my mom pushed for accommodation. Once I got that accommodation, I was able to function better at school. And that impacted my ability to like I had more confidence as a student and I was more sociable, and that I feel, it's my personal theory, influenced like my ability to progress socially. I can't necessarily say nobody knows what the distinction is between the levels. Like nobody knows exactly why that difference happens over time. Um, but I do think that there's something there. There's something like to look into about like what impacts that distinction over time, because I feel like a lot of us do start from a similar place when we're younger. Like when I was coming up, I didn't speak until I was 4. No, I didn't speak until I was 5. And I had a lot of specific struggles when I was learning. When I was learning to read and write, for some reason, I couldn't comprehend the letters unless I was writing them backwards. And it was like a lot of specific struggles that faded over time, but specifically like with hands-on attention to these things. And without that hands-on attention, I don't think that I would have overcome those, because we see it in like other communities where like when it's not addressed, there is no progression, like kids with dyslexia or kids with more extreme cases of ADHD, where like when they're just tucked away, the thing never gets better. And in fact, it progresses and worsens when they become adults. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that you're making me like remember some stuff from like being a kid. Because I remember being a kid and also like seeing the kids that were in like the special needs class, which I was not either. And I remember thinking like I could very easily be in there. Like I struggle. I had a hard time with reading at first. I had to get like special attention for like a couple of years. I also wrote things backwards. I realized in my 30s that I'm dyslexic, but I didn't know that. Like I forced myself to get good at reading, or I was forced to. I get how, anyways. But I remember like being a kid and thinking like I could very easily be in there. And I remember also thinking like I think I would be behaving very differently if I wasn't in with like the rest of the kids and being socialized with the rest of the kids. And I think there's I like definitely still and I hate the I hate using the terminology because I feel like everything is a minefield. Like I feel like there are the levels when you're younger, but also like how you are socialized absolutely changes like how that may present for you.
Yeah, like it's something that I pull from my personal experience and the experience that I see. The reason that this is my theory about it is because what I see, especially with like the new research and knowledge being accumulated about it, is is high masking individuals seem to be a lot more prevalent in like minority communities, people of color and especially like women and women of color. There's a lot more late diagnosis in those groups than there are in the traditional groups of autism diagnosis. And there's a lot more, I'm repeating myself, but that was the thing that I noticed from the current research is like that occurs a lot more in BIPOC communities and in like minority communities. And so that's why I think like there is that aspect of obviously that doesn't mean that's the cure because I don't want to just say like I am promoting ABA. I don't think that's the end all be all. But I do think that there is something there that um, warrants further attention.
I think that's like not to make it about me, but like to relate to get back like the video
Right,
that
right,
you
right.
brought up, like that's the point. Like I think that's the point is like it's the whole like throw the baby out with the bathwater thing is I think that some people I think there's a lot of very big emotions right now in the autistic community, very understandably, but we do a lot of like infighting and getting like very charged about things without being able to have like a nuanced conversation. And I think when it comes to just behavior um, intervention in general, that some people are just like, no, none of it, period. Other people are like, yes, all of it. And I think that like it's a nuanced conversation. And like that was like the whole point is like there are some behaviors that I think it may not be fun to change. And ideally we wouldn't have to, but also like we have to acknowledge like there are factors like safety and if the goal is to like improve someone's quality of life, um, I think that like you have to keep that in mind. And like it's a complicated conversation is what it is. It's very complicated. It's not just like one or the other.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
So beyond your content, can I ask? You mentioned before that you were working on a different job and that you eventually like let go. Can I ask what that job was?
Yeah, I was in corporate sales. I did IT sales. For I worked with nonprofits in New York. So I I had done that for like 8 years. And when I left the trucking industry and I remember thinking I could get a job where I like bury my nose in a spreadsheet, which I would love, or I had heard about this job in sales. And there are a couple different reasons I went into it, but one of it was specifically if I get a job in sales, I am going to learn how to talk to people better. Like I did it
Right.
to learn how to mask better. And I was good at it, but it was also all consuming. Like I spent all of my time thinking about it because it was so just mentally taxing to like navigate all of that stuff.
No, I definitely can relate to that. That was something that it's funny because it kind of goes along with everything we've been talking about in this episode. But when I started doing stand up, so I mentioned previously that I went through forms of behavior therapy. They weren't specifically ABA, but they were like socializing practices and like essentially I was in classes that were teaching me to speak and to speak to people. And it helped me start the journey of being able to talk in public. But to be honest, it wasn't until stand up that I actually got good at it. And a lot of it was that I was learning to have a personified voice because, when I'm shy and or I sound less interested in what I'm talking about because I take on a lot more monotoned way of speaking. And so I had to break out of that to get good at comedy. And that fed it into the social aspect of comedy where you go to mics and you go to shows and you're meeting other people and you have to talk to them. So, um, doing that voice, that person on stage allowed me to know what to do in person, like how to talk to people and like not pontificate. What's the word I'm talking about? Control my tone and inflection so that I sounded interested in the conversation. One of the funniest things that came from that was like is something that I share with other artistic people was like if you ever feel like the other person thinks you're not interested in conversation, just go like that and suddenly you seem more aware of the conversation. It was like little things like that that I was doing on stage that I brought into my conversation, but that was exhausting because it was all performative,
Yeah.
like because there's definitely and I know that there's a lot of comedian friends I know that know the difference between when I'm engaging and when they're talking to me. Because when I'm engaging, I'm talking like everyone else, but when they're talking to me, I'm talking about stuff that I like. So I'm a lot more hyperactive and a lot more like vocal and loud. Um, and it was a thing where like it's such a specific thing that I tell everyone this when they come to my shows. Like if you come to my show and you see me right after, I'm not going to engage because I'm coming down from like all of that energy that I had to feed into the performance because it gives me anxiety to be on stage. Because I'm having to like force myself to be, I am asking when I'm doing comedy because that's necessary for the comedy to work the way it works. It's an aspect of it. All that to say, like, I understand that feeling of like having to spend a specific amount of time intentionally masking for the sake of the work and then like recovering from that afterward.
Do you? I find the masking and recovery cycle to be very unpredictable at times because for me, and I'm curious if you run into this with stand up. Um, I've been doing improv for like 6 months now, just like classes, a couple of shows. So I don't have a ton of experience, but like uh it's a different kind of masking too. Like I think it's very relatable to masking. Same with like making my content. But like when I have I guess like a social event that I go to and I'm masking heavily and I get done and like I know that I did a good job. Like I like was engaging, I made people happy, I made people laugh, like I accomplished all the goals of masking that I want to accomplish. Sometimes afterwards it like gives me a high where I'm like then I'm like ready to have more conversations. I'm ready to spend more time around people because I'm just like I'm feeling really good and it almost comes as like a second nature. But then there are other times where I do it and even if I do a good job, it's like you said where I'm just drained. Like that's everything I had in the tank. I am gassed out. Um and I'm curious like if you ever get done and you have a set where you're like particularly proud of it, do you have that fluctuation where sometimes it is like you're feeling really good and energized and like ready to talk to people, or is it always when you're done, you're gassed and like coming down?
Well, it's become a thing where that space that happens after my show is an intentional practice.
Okay.
Um, so in my particular experience, I can't say necessarily that I can identify with that specifically, only because I make it a point to isolate myself in case I need to recover. Because there have been times, literally when I was first starting out, my best three sets, the first 5 years that I was doing it, I was having a panic attack while performing.
Oh
And
yeah.
and I had to come down from that. Like literally, I remember 2019, I did a set and I had and it's really popular. It's one of the ones that it's actually the clips that I originally posted, my very first clips of comedy on TikTok, were this specific set where I was having a panic attack, and afterward I tweeted people like, "Hey, if you see me crying, I'm okay. I'm just coming down from performing."
Yeah.
Um, I like tweeted that, and people liked it. I was like, I'm glad that I made you laugh, but no, seriously, leave me alone. And so it became a habit of mine to control the social anxiety that I experienced. That I take that break first to come down,
Sure.
and then if I'm ready, I engage. But if I'm not, then like I usually have people with me because I don't travel by myself. I don't drive, so I let them know like, hey, if you're down to hang, that's cool, but I'm probably gonna sit over here until you're ready to go, stuff like that, which in itself can be hard to explain to people. I don't know if you experience this, but like trying to explain burnout to people can be complicated for me because sometimes I am genuinely tired, but sometimes like I have to explain to people like I'm not tired, but I am so aware of my personal physical well-being that I do not have enough leftover attention to pay attention to you.
Yeah.
It's a thing of like, it's not that I don't care, but I'm physically in this moment incapable of acknowledging other people exist. Um, and yeah, that right now that's how I explain like social burnout to other people.
I have such I still have some pretty unhealthy habits when it comes to things like that. Um, and I haven't figured out because how old are you?
I'm 29, turned 30 in
20,
September.
okay, so I'm 36, and like I was in my 30s when I found out I was autistic, and so um, I think that like I had trying to think how to explain it. I had developed all of these like coping strategies to like get where I am because I in my head I was like, oh, everyone's just struggling with these same things. Anyways, I was in like extreme burnout and like trying to learn how to recuperate. But like I have all of these like unhealthy habits that I have learned to keep up with the world that like I'm now trying to unlearn. And so I still like I know exactly what you're talking about because as you're talking about like intentionally taking that space afterwards, I went to when I used to travel for work and like I would be out meeting with clients and I hated it. In some of those meetings, I was having panic attacks while I'm having the meeting. And like to explain that to someone, like what it's like to be literally having a panic attack, but still like putting on a show, like I think that most people don't understand like what that is like.
Yeah.
Um, your audience would probably understand it more than like the general audience, but most people are like, you can't do that. And it's like, no, that's like, you can. And it's fucking hard. Like, but afterwards, yeah, it's like, I would get invited to like, hey, let's go have drinks. And like all the other salespeople would be like, yeah, let's go do it. And I'm like, whoa, no, like absolutely not. And I'd go back to my hotel room and then I would like crash and also like feel this guilt because it's like, why can't I keep up with all these other people? Um, so like that's what I associate like my traveling for work with what you're talking about with the stand up routines. And it's like, yeah, every single time after that, I was just absolutely like burnt out. But you talked about communicating that to people. The thing is that I don't. I would always just make up excuses. Like that's what I learned to do, which was also because I wasn't raised to understand how to have like healthy, not conflict, but like set boundaries with people. And like I'm trying to learn how to do that now, but like now I just don't do social stuff because I have kids and whatnot. But
Right.
so yeah, explaining like burnout to people, uh, I don't have a healthy way to do that yet. It's good for you. I mean, that's great that you do that. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you know, it's always nobody's no two cases are identical, of course. Um, there are a lot of things I think I do that work for me. Like another thing I realized that I started doing, it started off as a personal hobby and turned into a sort of not defense mechanism, but a way for me to be present without having to engage, is I learned how to balloon twist. So I bring my balloons with me everywhere. And I'm just now realizing that I do this after shows on the days where I can't socialize, where I start offering people balloons because then I can sit in the conversation circle
Yeah.
and don't have to engage. Nobody engages with me. They're just waiting for the balloon. And all I have to focus on is the thing I want to do. And so it's like a perfect way for me to be there without having to talk. And it's kind of been successful because I signed my tag on my balloons and I got good at it. I can make it currently I can make something like 40 different balloon animals.
Wow.
And I learned that it started out as a hobby, but I'm realizing I also learned that so that I don't have to talk to people, which I think is funny.
Yeah.
Um, what else? There's another thing that I wanted to comment on. Um, had to do with social. What we were just talking about. It's gone. It's deep. This Strateris.
I love the balloon animal thing. I relate to that so much. Um, which funnily enough, we've done balloon animals with my kids. I can't stand them because when they pop, that sound like sends me over the edge, like the popping noise.
Yeah.
But I hear what you say. It's almost like a form of parallel play because like you're
Yes.
happy to be in like the environment, but also it's like it's a coping strat, like it's a coping mechanism. And I do that all the time. Like when I'm in social situations, like I feel like I'm running around doing things, and that's why for the longest time in my life, I didn't know how to be with people one on one I preferred groups because I could like just come in and out of the conversation if I didn't have to say anything. Like the onus wasn't on me, but if I did have something to say, like I could pop in and pop back out. And I just relate a lot to that, like what you're saying about using that as like a way to be with people, but not have like the weight or the onus of like conversation being put on you when you're not able to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't even relate. I think that was the word I was trying to look for earlier was parallel play, because that's something that I do think is an aspect of it. Um, but yeah, I think I also still kind of struggle with one-on-one unless I'm like intention, unless there's a reason for us to constantly engage with and like I get along extremely well with that person. I do think that's something that I'm still working on. It's the individual conversation.
It's tough.
Um, the closest I have right now is is also the balloons, because people ask me questions, and as long as I focus on the balloons, I can keep talking. That's the other thing about it is like I'm hyper focused, so I just am answering questions without thinking.
Yeah.
What was I going to bring up? What was I going to say? Oh, can you speak more about your experience having, what's the word? I don't like using the word comorbid diagnoses because I think it sounds morbid. My friend, my friend and previous guest Danny uses a specific word, but I can't remember what it is. The closest one I have is coexisting diagnosis, which I think is what they also say, but I don't want to quote them if I'm getting it wrong. Um, but can you talk more about having more than one diagnosis at the same time, kind of like how that impacts um, your experience learning about them individually as well as them interacting together?
You're trying to get me in trouble today, Ryan. I have a theory that I don't know if I should break out quite yet. Oh man. So my two official diagnoses are just ADHD and autism. Um, I I do know that I'm dyslexic. Um, I do struggle with anxiety, but it's really hard to disseminate like what's the difference between anxiety and what's just like a byproduct of being neurodivergent in a world that's not meant for us. So I'll speak to those two, I guess specifically. Um, it's very hard to differentiate between the two of them, and some people listening right now might be screaming and saying, no, like there's a clear difference because some people have like very strong opinions about this, but there's so much conflicting information out there. Um, and even the professionals, I feel like, do not have a good grasp on like what's the difference between ADHD and autism. Um, is it all part of the same like pool of characteristics? I'm actually I was literally writing a skit um, as I was waiting for you to send the link over about um, how Adderall studies have shown that like Adderall can sometimes amplify the effects of some of the struggles of being autistic, and there are like different theories as to why. Uh, because some people say that it's because it helps you with your ADHD symptoms, which may have been more noticeable, and since those have like died down, there's less noise, and you can start to notice your autism symptoms. But also, like I am a strong believer in the intense world theory, which are you familiar with the
It it sounds familiar. I know someone told me about it, but I don't.
It's so the idea is that being autistic, our brains just kind of experience things at a heightened state. Things are more intense, feelings are more intense, sensations are more intense. This is why we get overstimulated. This is why we like start to shut down. Um, the more that I learn about that, it lines up very much with my experience and with a lot of the research. Anyways, so then like I find myself thinking like, well, Adderall is a stimulant, which like increases like how much I'm thinking about things in some ways, which could like mimic um hyper oh man, why am I drawing a blank right now? Uh not hyper awareness, but It's one of the things that often gets mixed up with autism because of trauma.
Hyperactivity?
No, not hyperactivity. It's a trauma response where like you're in an environment where you like have to be constantly like thinking about like how is this person going to react. Hypervigilance.
Yes.
Um, and so and that's just the thing that I'm wondering about. I'm not saying that that's a thing. Anyways, that the comorbidities, especially with like taking medication, um, it makes things really confusing. But also, and I'm guessing maybe this is more what your question was about, was dealing with the different um like ways that makes my brain almost like self-sabotaging, antithetical to itself in a lot of ways. Like with the ADHD, I need stimulus, I need new things, I need to experience new, I need things that are exciting. But with autism, I need some level of predictability. It doesn't necessarily have to be reliable or like consistent. I just need to be able to predict what's going to happen because going with the flow like takes a lot out of me. But also if I do that too much, then I'm bored and then like I am understimulated and losing motivation. So there's like a lot of juggling of the things like that, how the two things manifest in my brain. I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point. Is there anything specific that you're?
Well, but I do understand what you're saying, and it does remind me of something that I have adjusted to as someone who also has ADHD and autism, of that sort of thin line between required structure and like um, resistance to tediousness. Like something I do, so something that I started doing, I want to say like 3 years ago to help with my own self maintenance is instead of creating rules for myself, which is like how I was, not me specifically, like when you're a kid, sometimes your parents create house rules to kind of like guide you into forming positive habits. Um, and I started to realize and think that that idea of rules has the connotation of requirement, which has the connotation of demand. And it made it hard for me. It made it where I was anxious to do things because the idea of doing it, like if I overslept, then I'm like, it's going to be embarrassing to get up and shower now because it's so late in the day and people are going to comment and judge me. And so the way that I started to work on deconstructing that mentality so that I could continue to take care of myself and not that, that was one example, but in eating and like going to a doctor's appointments and stuff like that is instead of creating rules, I created daily goals. Um, with the condition that like start with the thing that you need to start with, like have something you need to start with, and then the stuff that you want to do in the day. And each time I complete a task, I check in to see how much room I have left for the other tasks. So it's like, let's say in a single day, I have to go to the grocery store, I have to shower, I have to eat and drink water. I have to call my therapist. I want to paint, to edit videos, to post online, to live stream. So I start with going to the store, and when I'm home, I see what I have room for after that, and it allows me to overcome that sense that if I don't do everything, I suddenly feel like I didn't accomplish anything, and it started, essentially like I started having conversations with myself where I was like, well, no, you did this today, which was important. And then that took all day, that took a lot of energy out of you, but it was something necessary. And then you did have time to do something else today. So you did do things today. And I think that kind of took a lot of the fear out of just daily regiments and like consistent structuring.
Yeah, it's you're reminding me of one of the bigger struggles, and like not to pivot too much. I think one of the bigger struggles for me, and I don't being a parent, like I realized I used to have like I had developed all these things to help me get through my day, and after having kids, like um It's like I don't have time to do the things that I used to do. And so then I would like I really have struggled with, to me it sounds like you're kind of talking about I hate this word. I don't know why. Like giving yourself grace, where like you're not beating yourself up because you didn't like you're acknowledging like, oh, I did this one thing and like maybe that took longer than I thought it was going to take, or like maybe that's all I had in the tank today, but like I still got something done. And that's like been a really hard thing for me to learn. I grew up in the Midwest where it's like a very like just go 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 go. Um, I don't know why the Midwest matters. I don't even know why I feel like that's like I and so like I have always like felt like this like guilt for like not doing enough stuff. And I've had to learn how to just be like, hey, you did so and so today, and even on days where I'm like, I didn't do anything. I didn't actually accomplish anything today. And it's like, but that's fine. Like tomorrow's another day. And that's actually become more productive for me than like beating myself up. And I guess maybe that's not quite what you were saying because you were talking about like PDA too, which like I also get, but yeah, I forget where I was going with that.
I mean, no, I do understand. I believe I understand what you're saying. It does remind me of like part of the reason I started doing this is because I feel I inherited that mentality from being raised, my own personal experience being raised in a Latino household, especially with like in a community where a lot of the Latinos that I grew up with were undiagnosed themselves. So they, it's a passed down inherited mentality that of overcompensating and hypermasking. Um, because the reason I started doing it this way specifically is because I was doing something that I learned from other people of like over what's the word I want to use? Filling my day with too many things so that it didn't stop
Oh
because
yeah.
it become overwhelming, like back to back things, and then I don't have time to do the things that I actually enjoy because instead of trying to spread something out throughout the week, I'm trying to shove it all in one day. Um, and that's even something that like now that I do it for myself, I always am pushing and recommending it to like older relatives that I have that do it. Sorry, what's it? Because I see that in them too, where it's like as long as they're doing it, they seem fine. But the second that something trips them up and throws off the whole day, they become anxious and like nervous and upset. And it affects their ability to not only maintain themselves in that moment, but interact with other people throughout the day and even like throughout the week. Like if it happens at the beginning of the week, that their whole week is gone because they're upset now with the world. And I was doing that to myself, and I realized like, no, like if something can't happen today, then you just move it on to the next day. Or like if you had a day where like I'll have days, not every day, and you know what I mean, like once in a while I'll have a day where like I overslept or my body just needed to rest, and like I still maintain like I still ate, I still drink water, I still showered, I didn't do anything else today. I was like, oh, my brain still has that voice of like, well, why didn't you do anything else today? And I have to like um, I tell people that I literally talk to myself, or I have to be like, well, what else did you do that week? You know what I mean? Or like, it's the start of the week. You have room. Like, if it's at the beginning, if it's on a Monday, I'm like, you have the rest of the week to accomplish these things. Unless there's specific deadlines that you're missing, you're fine. And if it's at the end of the week, it's like, you had a productive week. As long as you're doing, you know what I mean? It's like, it's okay to take a break one day. And that brings me to the other thing I talk about where like, I know that a lot of high masking people with autism talk about a loud inner monologue. And I think that I used to make the joke that I feel like it's so loud because we're so used to like asking those questions out loud, but then people tell us not to ask those questions. So we just are having conversations with ourselves in our head. It's like, it's not that our inner monologue is loud. It's that we don't have anyone else to have this conversation with. So we're literally talking to ourselves. I even make the joke like I started doing that out loud, and I'm literally like having a two-person conversation with myself where I'm like, why do I feel like I'll literally like, why do I feel so bad today? And then I'll say out loud to myself, like, oh, it's because you didn't drink water. And it's like they sound silly and kind of ridiculous, from an outward perspective, but my day to day has become a lot more calmer. And like, I still have anxiety disorders and I still have OCD and I still have panic attacks once in a while, but it's substantially dropped from where I was like at 21, where I was having a panic attack every day. And a lot of it is because of me just taking the time to have that conversation with myself so that I understand like what is the difference between what I need to get done and just what I want to get done.
Do you feel like you used to would you describe it as like a spiral when you start to have like the bad thoughts, like I didn't get this done or whatever? Would you then like start to
Yeah,
spiral from
yeah,
there? Yeah.
yeah. I
I
think that's how it's true.
that's what I used to do a lot. And I've heard that from other people in the like ADHD community talking about spiraling, like the thought loop. Um, and one of the biggest things for me was I think it sounds very similar to what you're saying. But like I started trying to like meditate, which I've heard a lot of people say like I could never do that. My brain's too busy. And like there are like different ways to meditate. I only did it for like a year, but like it stuck with like that was the thing that helped me break the those loops, like the spiral, because that really used to derail me. And I hear what you're saying too. Like I have family members too that like I highly suspect are undiagnosed, and I see them like it's like something um will come along and just like derail them, and sometimes like they just are derailed for months, like because things just keep coming along, and
Yeah.
like and I think it's because of that like that spiral. And like learning to interrupt that I feel like is so beneficial, but it's so interesting that like that's a common thread in the community.
Yeah, I think I even a long time ago came up with I like coming up with analogies. I don't know what
Yeah.
I call it the secret rule book. Like every person with neurodivergency has a rule book that they don't realize they wrote for themselves because they believe in their heads that's not their rule book, that's the rule book. And then they get older and they become adults and they realize nobody else has that rule book. And they didn't know that until they were diagnosed.
Yep.
Um, I forgot what else I was going to say to that. But yeah, it's a funny thing that I don't know, because I know you do the skits. I don't know if you have a habit of this, but I have like very specific analogies and metaphors that I come up with to explain these things. Like I think the three that I use the most prevalently are the rule book thing. When I'm explaining masking, I make a joke about like you got to think about like Batman's mask. Going back to what I was saying earlier, where like when Batman, the idea of Batman is a specific concept that I think is a not a perfect metaphor for masking, but it is a comparable one of like there's two sides to the idea of Batman. There's the outward persona that he's literally projecting, which is that he wants you to think this thing about him. And then there's the inside, what he's hiding on the inside. On the inside, he's Bruce Wayne. He doesn't want people to know that he's Bruce Wayne. And that's like how I relate it to masking of like the outward and inward persona of literally wearing a mask. And then the most recent one that I started saying, I think is funny because the last like three people that I explained it to immediately got it, was trying to explain the spectrum. Because I think a lot of people think it's a grading scale of less to worse autistic. And I was like, no, it's kind of more like baseball cards where like everyone who plays baseball has a baseball card with a list of stats. And they have stats in similar categories, but they don't have the same number in those categories as each other. And so anyone who plays baseball will have those stats, but you only get the stats if you play baseball. In the same vein, like you are only on the spectrum if you're autistic. Like that's that's how I respond to people who try to say like, well, isn't everyone a little bit autistic? It's like, no, that's not how it works. You are autistic or you're not autistic. And so that was just like a thing that I started rambling about. I thought of as like, I don't know if you come up with similar things to explain. Like, I know that you've come up with characters. One that's jumping to my mind because it's a clip that was reinserted into my daily feed was your Jonah Hill video where you had like
Oh wow.
I forget what you called it, but it was a fairy. You had a scepter. Yeah,
Therapy
specific
fairy.
the therapy fairy, so that you
Yeah.
explain boundary. Um, so I don't know if is that like a consistent thing when you're writing your skits, like coming up with characters and like specific
No.
metaphors.
Okay, so analogies and metaphors and similes. I had someone message me the other day and asked me to explain the difference between the three. And I was like, that's such a weird thing to ask me to do. And then I was like, no, it actually makes sense because I love analogies. And I've been working on for months now, and I just need to make this video about bottom up thinking. And I talk about analogies and why they're so useful because it literally allows you to take like an existing framework and just copy and paste it, and like you have the existing like tree and branches and you can just swap out the details, but you understand like how the mechanics work. And that's like the beauty of analogies, is that they help us learn things like so much faster. So like I use analogies all the time. And when you're talking about Batman, do you know Watchmen?
Yeah.
I was thinking, for me, I feel like the mask, I think more like of Rorschach, where it's like the mask changes. Um, but also the baseball card thing, like for me, the analogy that I think of um, is like, do you know what a mixing board is?
Yes.
You're in a studio. I bet you have one there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think of like sliders. And like every single one of those sliders is like an attribute that has to do with like struggles or characteristics of being autistic. And everybody in the world, even if they're on the spectrum or not, is going to have some level of those like characteristics, but you get to like a heightened state where you're dealing with them more intensely and more frequently. It's very similar to what you're saying, but like also, yeah, analogies. Like that's how I think that's a common thing with autistic people, is like I think that because we think bottom up, I think that analogies are very helpful for us to like navigate the world. And I completely forgot what your question was because I just started rambling.
No, yeah. I think that's like a common thing today. um, what was I asking? Oh no, I think I was asking in general if you also do that where you frequently come up with like analogies and metaphors.
Oh yeah, and then you asked about characters. You
Yeah,
talked about
yeah.
therapy fairy. Characters, I'm awful at. That's actually like I look at other people that do skits and like they're consistent with doing characters, and I'm not. Like the therapy fairy, I think, is probably the only character, like actual character, that I've come up with. Um, and I've used it in like 5 or 6 videos, and I had fun with it. Like it was fun. I had them like popping out of stuff, like doing green screens. But no, like I'm really bad at characters.
No, I mean, there's some people that are like insanely good at like I don't know if
Yeah.
you saw what is it, Buddy Boutique or Buddy? It's a steakhouse skit that
Oh,
this
Bistro
guy
Hutty.
Bistro Hutty.
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah. I know.
I
Yeah,
forget that it's literally one, like it's different writers, but it's one guy playing every single character. It's
yeah.
crazy.
Drew.
Yeah,
Yeah, he's really good at what he does, and he like yeah he knocks it out of the park. I've actually like I didn't want to copy him, but like I have in my head, if I had the discipline to do it, I have toyed around a lot with trying to um do something like that, but for like a therapist's office. And so like
right.
there's like a receptionist and like the therapist and like different kinds of therapists. And anyways, yeah, he's really good at what he does. He's amazing at like playing all those characters.
Yeah, and they keep adding new characters, and it's always like it never feels like a repetition of
Yeah.
the same guy. And I think it's really interesting.
Yep.
It's something that I definitely would like to, because I practice impressions for my act, and I'm trying to get into voice acting. So it's definitely something that I'm interested in like developing as a skill.
Yeah.
But that has nothing to do with the episode. I just
You're not going to do some voices, you know?
I can. I do them a lot. Like right now my favorite closer is I do have you seen There Will Be Blood?
I've seen clips of it, but I've never actually.
Well, do you know like
That's the oil one, right?
yeah, do you know the monologue, the milkshake monologue?
Yeah, I'll make you drink my tea or whatever, or drink my.
Yeah, it's like I drink your I do that whole like the actual monologue, but as Mickey Mouse.
Mm.
And a lot of people are gonna kick out of that. Where it's like, let's say you have a milkshake, and I have a milkshake. I want to do the whole thing because this will be like the 10th time I've done it on the show. But yeah, I definitely am like interested in learning stuff like that. Um, I think that's everything that we had prepared to cover. I don't think I have any questions left. How long have we been going?
Over now.
Yeah, so this has been great. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you for being a guest. I was a huge fan. I think you were one of the first substance creators I followed when I joined TikTok in the first place. So this is really cool to get to talk to you.
It's been great.
You're at, I think it's the same thing on all platforms, right? Generic Art Dad. So if anyone wants to follow, thank you for sticking with us. If there's any questions you have for me or Chris, let us know in the comments. Maybe you can come back on and answer those. And we'll put your links and everything in the bio. And I don't have a sign up, so have a good day. Have a good day to you, and see you next time. Bye.
All right. Thanks.